All right. Earlier in the show, in the intro, we talked about Juicy Garland and problems she had with her drag queen story hour in Concord, New Hampshire. So let's talk to Juicy about that. Juicy, come on in.
Hi, how are you tonight?
Fine, Juicy. Glad you could make it. I understand you were flying today and you had delays.
Yes, I got here by the skin of my teeth, but I made it.
Oh, you look great. You look great. So, tell us about where did you start doing drag?
Yeah, so I started doing drag maybe 5 years ago, inspired by a friend who also does drag. And I started performing in the Boston area. My first performance was at this club, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which unfortunately didn't survive the pandemic. But since then, I really jumped onto an online space as soon as the pandemic hit and was able to do drag on a weekly basis thanks to Charlie Hides, who did an online week. And throughout the pandemic, I worked on my drag. And once the pandemic sort of began to open up, especially in the Boston area, I was able to start performing. So I've been performing in the Boston area for about 2 years now. And over the summer, I made contacts with this wonderful business. It's a cafe. There are 2 locations in New Hampshire called Teetotaler. And they invited me to do a story hour back in late September. And I was super excited. I have a background in science and education. So I was just really excited to talk about science and potentially space or biology with kids, and settled on the theme of space, where we had our story hour in Concord, New Hampshire on, I think, the 13th. The date is a little fuzzy in my brain. It's been a while. Ooh, uh-oh.
You're still there.
Okay, good.
Go on.
Oh, yes. So, when I was preparing for the story hour event in Concord at Teetotaler, they gave me a heads up that they had received some troubling messages from Proud Boys, so I prepared myself. I had gotten everything ready for the event. Then, when I got there, there had been about a dozen or so people who were there to protest the event. And they were there with your, bog standard white nationalist signs. There were also a few extremist Christians who were there as well. I went upstairs, I got ready, and by the time I was done getting ready, there were maybe 90 to 100 people who had showed up to counter-protest.
Oh.
And it was the most amazing reaction I could have hoped for. So overwhelmingly, the community of Concord counter-protested the Proud Boys. And they encircled the cafe, which had a lot of windows, in order to make sure that the kids didn't get scared. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, my biggest concern was whether or not the kids would be affected by these jerks who were just outside. So it turned effectively into a huge pride event for Concord, and 100 people encircled this cafe, blocking the windows with dance and pride flags. And we were able to have a really, really successful story hour and brunch for the kids. We ended up getting, I think, about 30 families, which took up a huge amount of space in that cafe.
Did the Proud Boys disperse?
Say that again?
Did the Proud Boys disperse? Did they leave?
Yes, yeah. They did.
How did that make you feel?
I was going in, I had a lot of trepidation. I was very anxious, but I'm the kind of person who, when faced with jerks like this, tend to double down. Some call it a character flaw. I'm pretty fond of it. So I was only encouraged to make sure that I went through with this event the second I found out there would be protesters. And it was nerve-wracking until the moment where I realized there were so many people from Concord's community that had come to really support the event. So I feel very fortunate because not everyone has had this kind of response. But the people in New Hampshire really wanted to show these white nationalists that they weren't welcome. And throughout the day, as things carried on and I felt safer, I began to just be so happy to just have a positive event to talk about science with kids.
Were you, was the press there? Was the media?
Yeah, so a couple local Concord papers had showed up. I spoke with one of them, and NPR also was as well. They did not interview me, unfortunately, But one thing I made sure to do was, after the event itself was over, there were still so many people. I went out and thanked them, right? Because we couldn't have had a positive, educational, fun experience without all of the people who had shown up. So I went out and I spoke to everyone who was there in the rain, my poor wig. And then I was able to speak with, I think it's the Concord Tribune. I'm not super familiar with the paper, so I'd have to look it up.
What's happened since then? Obviously, you got some publicity. Was that good
Yeah, a
or
little bit.
bad?
So there was initially a bit of online harassment, but I learned to be very fond of the block button. And actually, someone in the Concord area had gotten a hold of my Venmo information, I think from the cafe, and encouraged people in a YouTube video to send me tips. So I ended up out of nowhere the night before. I was at the movies, out at the movies with a friend, and I started receiving tips left and right on Venmo. So I got a little bit of online support. I did get a little bit more visibility, which was great. And it really felt good to be rewarded for something I was excited about and something I felt good about.
What's happened since then?
Since then, the negative noise online has died out. A few news articles had come out in the Concord newspaper and on PR. And I've just tried to carry on with my life and just keep performing in the Boston area. I am hoping to go back to Teetotum for another story time, but there in the winter, taking a bit of a break in drag events until maybe winter or spring. And at that point, I anticipate going back and doing more.
So where do you perform, and what's your act? Tell me about your act.
So I tend to perform at Jacques at MT's Drag Stroll, and I'm always looking for other drag events to participate in as well. I tend to do more of a mid and early 20th century campy kind of drag. So I perform to a lot of Broadway tunes, or every now and then I'll throw in something from the 80s or early 90s that's a little bit more peppy. I make almost everything I wear, so I see every act as an opportunity to also challenge myself creatively and so on. So I tend to focus on sort of campy looking numbers that really sort of satisfy me creatively.
Do you sing or lip sync?
I usually lip sync. I can sing, although I have yet to work up the courage to actually sing in front of an audience in drag. It's a little hard to sing in a corset, and I tend to cinch pretty tightly.
Your diaphragm. Yes, protect your diaphragm. All right, Judy, thank you so much for sharing your story with us tonight. We're going to have you back on to talk to the other girls in just a second, so stand by.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.